Hi, this is the Philosophical Angle program, and I'm your host, Chris Angle. The purpose of the Philosophical Angle is to examine the nature of concepts and ideas in current media. I'm the author of 5 books on philosophy known as the Detmar-Haskell Dialogues, and they are The Nature of Aesthetics, The Nature of Ethics, The Nature of Truth, The Philosophical Equations of Economics, The Nature of the Political Left and Right. Please hit the like button and subscribe and comment. And so this week, our podcast is going to be on President Trump's visit to the World Economic Forum conference in Davos. We're going to entitle it, Growth Does Not Cause Inflation. And so, as we mentioned just now, President Trump did visit the World Economic Forum conference in Davos. He mentioned there in his speech that growth hasn't anything to do with inflation. Well, is it true or not? Luckily, you are tuned in to the Philosophical Angle program, and we're going to discover whether this is a correct statement or not. Let's begin. So the first thing we need to do is define growth. So I think that's fairly easy. Growth is the increased output of an economy over time, but we need to understand how is that created. Well, increasing growth is accomplished by implanting efficiencies within the economic transaction. And if we add up all the economic transactions, we'll see that that produces growth in the overall economic statistics. So, what is a transaction economically speaking? Well, it is the risk, the time, the information, knowledge, the effort, and if it's a product, then we have to add in material. So when any efficiencies come to act upon these variables of the transaction, growth is generated. So a way to increase growth is to increase the knowledge and information within the transaction, or increase the materials, or decrease the time, and decrease the risk and effort. Transactions receiving these efficiencies will be able to put out more with less. So next, all we have to do is add in all the transactions of an economy, and it will add up to the gross domestic product. In a primitive economy, it's fairly clear how the variables need to be acted upon. First, we could spend more time in doing our transactions, in manufacturing our service by increasing the number of transactions, or more time in producing our service or product. Or we can reduce our risk by doing it in a safe place. We can increase our effort and work more to produce more. However, for a complex society, one that is producing greater and more complicated goods and services, the information knowledge variable becomes much more important, because that's where all the efficiencies really come to play upon the economic transaction. So with increased knowledge and information being injected into the goods and services that you are producing, the risk will be reduced, the time will become less to produce a product, the effort will become less due to efficiencies created such as through machines, robots, or other mechanical advantages. And materials may become cheaper through greater knowledge and information about how to obtain them. So, in other words, the more we get to know our goods and services that we produce, the more we will create new knowledge and information that we can apply to its production and make the whole thing more efficient. So now what about inflation? What's its nature? Well, inflation is the dollar denoted, or other currency denoted, cost of this good, of this service that we're producing. If we add in the total number of transactions and we divide it by the number of dollars in play in our society, then we get a standard amount to be able to delineate the price of any particular product or service that we're producing. However, if a government agency decides to print more money and not to increase its efficiencies, which would result in greater production of goods and services, then we're going to get inflation. And most economists have agreed with this. When governments add more money supply to the same amount of goods and services being produced, this will induce inflation. Pretty much all famous economists will agree with this. However, we should note that if efficiencies are being produced through the increase in knowledge in the production of advanced goods and services, and if there is no corresponding increase in the money supply, then we can actually deflate an economy through growth by making all the goods and services less in a price per the monetary unit of choice. This would be the result of an increase in productivity. However, ideally, the central banks, or central bank, one per country, should increase the money supply as per the increase in goods and services, and it will come out equally. Therefore, in conclusion, the president was right. Growth has nothing to do with inflation. Thanks for tuning in to the Philosophical Angle program. See you next time.